There is a question, a single profound inquiry, that beats at the very heart of the human experiment. Are we alone? This isn't just a scientific curiosity. It is the central question of our identity. It's etched into the radio signals we beam into the void and carved into the trenches we dig in the ancient dust. We are a species defined by our search for the other, for a mirror to hold up to our own improbable existence. We point our telescopes at the ink-black abyss and our microscopes at the first stirrings of life in geothermal vents, all in service of this one unifying quest. Our search has, quite naturally, been guided by our own reflection. We are terrestrial creatures, born of mud and minerals, and so we look for life that shares our story. We sift the strata of the earth, searching for the fossilized bones of our ancestors or the stone tools of a forgotten predecessor. Our heroes of discovery are the archaeologist, brush in hand, dusting off a relic, and the paleontologist, freeing a skeleton from its rocky tomb. We are looking for a history written in stone, a story we can hold in our hands. When our gaze shifts from the past to the present, from the ground to the heavens, this bias follows us. We scan the cosmos with our radio dishes, listening for a structured signal, a whisper of mathematics in the cosmic static. We hunt for exoplanets, but not just any. We hunt for worlds in the habitable zone, the narrow band where liquid water can pool on a surface. We are looking for another Earth, another rocky platform for life to arise, just as it did for us. Our entire framework for astrobiology is built on this one assumption, that life needs a floor. But this relentless focus, down into the dirt and out into the deep, has left us with a profound, almost comical blind spot. We have ignored the single largest, most dynamic, and most chemically complex environment on our own planet. We have forgotten to look, quite literally, right above our heads. I'm talking about the atmosphere. We treat the sky as empty space, a transparent medium we move through to get from one point of ground to another. But this is a failure of imagination. Earth's atmosphere is not a thin veneer. It is a three-dimensional ocean of staggering proportions. The troposphere, the stratosphere, the mesosphere, taken together, their habitable volume dwarfs that of our liquid seas. This is a world in its own right, a realm of high-speed winds, colossal electrical charges, and complex chemical soups, all bathed in a constant, powerful flux of solar radiation. We already know this aerial ocean is not sterile. We know that microbes, fungi, and pollen ride these currents in a vast aerial plankton. But what if that's just the bottom of a food chain we've refused to see? What if, in the billions of years before the first fish crawled onto land, this atmospheric ocean was not just inhabited, but was the cradle of Earth's first, and perhaps most sophisticated, experiment with consciousness? What if life didn't have to crawl but could just float? This is the question that drives our investigation. What if we are the second intelligence on Earth? What if, long before we existed, a civilization of complex, sentient beings arose, lived, and died entirely within the clouds? Beings made not of heavy, ground-based elements, but of buoyant gases, condensed vapor, and perhaps even pure plasma. A civilization whose thoughts were storms, whose cities were vortices, and whose entire history was written in the language of lightning. If such a life form existed, it would solve our greatest puzzle, the problem of evidence. Where are their ruins? Where are their bones? They would have left none. They would be ghosts, their entire civilization as ephemeral as a thunderhead. Their extinction would not be a layer of iridium in the rock, but a simple dispersal. A final, silent sigh in the upper atmosphere. We have been scanning the mud for fossils and the stars for signals, but what if we've been missing the most incredible story of all? Right here? What if the first intelligent beings on Earth never touched the ground? I can hear the objection already, and it's the right one. It is the loud, insistent voice of our rational mind that separates science from mere fantasy. Where is the proof? This question is the great filter for all extraordinary claims, the bedrock of the scientific method. We live in a universe governed by physical laws, by cause and effect, and a civilization vast and intelligent must leave a trace. Our own brief, Noisy history is already etching a scar into the planet's geology, a layer of plastic and isotopes that will outlive us for millennia. So where are their bones? Where are their cities? Where is the shadow of their long-vanished existence? We are conditioned, perhaps inescapably, to think of history as something tangible. It is a story told in stone and bone, a narrative we can touch. When we imagine a being, we picture a physical body, a dense collection of cells and skeletons that can, under perfect and violent conditions, mineralize and become a fossil. When we imagine a civilization, we picture tools, temples, and cities, structures built of durable materials, forged in fire, and designed to resist the slow, crushing grind of entropy. Our entire concept of a trace, our very definition of evidence, is hopelessly built on this single terrestrial assumption, that things last. But this assumption is the very heart of our terrestrial chauvinism. We are creatures of the ground, and so we build with things from the ground: stone, metal, wood, and concrete. But what if your entire reality was the sky? What if your body was not a dense, centralized mass of proteins and calcium, but a vast, decentralized, organized structure of electrified gas, water vapor, and complex pressure gradients? What would you build? You wouldn't carve a tool from stone. You might weave a focused electrical charge. You wouldn't build a skyscraper. You would learn to sculpt a self-sustaining vortex, a stable updraft, a home made not of matter, but of weather. And what would happen when such a being died? There would be no corpse to fall to the earth, no heavy form to be covered by sediment. There would be no skeleton to fossilize in the mud. A body made of organized energy and buoyant gas would simply disperse. Its heat would radiate away into the cold of the upper stratosphere. Its constituent gases would seamlessly mix with the surrounding air. Its complex electrical charge would neutralize. It would be like trying to find the fossil of a thunderstorm or the skeleton of a rainbow. The entire concept is a profound category error. The body would be gone in moments, its parts perfectly and instantly recycled by the atmospheric ocean from which it was born. This same logic of ephemerality must then apply to their entire civilization. Their cities would be patterns, not places. Their infrastructure would be sustained phenomena, not physical objects. Their libraries, their art, their collective histories, all of it might have been encoded in complex, cascading electrical signals, or in vast, transient chemical clouds that shifted with the seasons. When this civilization finally fell, it wouldn't leave a single stone behind for us to find. It would not leave ruins to be overgrown by jungles. It would simply stop. The storms would become chaotic again, the patterns would dissolve, and the signals would fade into the background noise of the planet, leaving no echo at all. Even our most forward-thinking science remains, in its heart, anchored to the ground. The Silurian hypothesis, for instance, famously and brilliantly asks if we could find evidence of a pre-human industrial civilization. But what does it search for? It searches for plastic residue in the ocean sediment, for isotope anomalies from forgotten nuclear events, for the chemical scars of a civilization that drills, burns, and builds, precisely like we do. It is a vital, brilliant question, but it is still fundamentally a terrestrial one. It's asking if there was another ambitious primate who walked the ground. Our hypothesis is more radical and therefore more elusive. It suggests a life form that was post-physical before we were ever physical at all. An intelligence that had no need for clumsy industry, no mining, no plastics, because it had mastered the medium it inhabited. And this leads us to the most profound and perhaps unsettling realization of all. The total, spectacular, perfect absence of evidence is not a failure of the theory. It is its central prediction. We have been searching for a ghost by looking for its bones. But the very nature of this ghost, its atmospheric, ephemeral, electrical existence, dictates that it could not leave any. This lack of ruins isn't a dead end. It is the central, defining feature of our entire investigation, the master clue that tells us we're looking at the wrong kind of problem. We've been searching for a needle in a haystack, but we should have been looking for the shape of the wind, or the lingering warmth of a fire that went out 1 billion years ago. We must, therefore, discard our old, ground-based metrics of evidence entirely. We must stop looking for the thing and start imagining the process. The question is not, where are the bodies? The real, the scientific, the imaginative question is, how, in the first place, could you even build a body out of thin air? To imagine a ghost, we must first build the machine. To speculate on a mind, we must first construct the body. The question of how life could exist in the thin air is, at its core, a problem of biology, of energy, and of architecture. How do you build a stable, complex organism without a single solid thing to stand on? How do you assemble a creature, not from flesh and bone, but from wind, water, and light? The task seems impossible, a flight of pure fantasy, until we look at what life is already doing. Right now, above our heads. The sky is not sterile. It is, in fact, thronging with life. Scientists call it the aeroplankton, a vast, invisible river of microbes, viruses, fungi, and pollen grains that have been swept up from the surface. But swept up is the wrong term. It implies they are just passive passengers. We now know that many of these microbes are metabolically active. They are living in the clouds, feeding on the chemicals found there, reproducing and dying, all while suspended miles above the ground. This isn't a hypothesis. It's the established, teeming base of an aerial ecosystem we've only just begun to explore. And what of the conditions? The intense radiation, the freezing cold, the lack of pressure? We used to see these as barriers to life. But the study of extremophiles has taught us one profound lesson. Life is a chemical system of astonishing arrogance. It thrives in the boiling, acidic mud of Yellowstone, in the crushing, lightless pressure of the Mariana Trench, and in the salt-cured, arid deserts of Chile. Life doesn't just tolerate extreme conditions. It specializes in them. The atmosphere is not a barren wasteland. It is simply an empty, unclaimed evolutionary niche, awaiting an organism clever enough to crack the code. This problem has been approached before not as science fiction, but as rigorous, predictive science. When the great Carl Sagan and his colleague E. Salpeter turned their minds to the atmosphere of Jupiter, they didn't just see chaos. They saw an opportunity. They calculated that in the dense, turbulent clouds, life could evolve into three distinct forms: microscopic sinkers, hunters that preyed on them, and most spectacularly, floaters. These, they imagined, would be living balloons, cities in size, drifting on the Jovian winds, filtering nutrients from the air, and remaining buoyant by using their own metabolic heat to keep their hydrogen-filled bladders warmer than the air around them. So let's take Sagan's model and bring it home to the early Earth. We don't need to invent a creature from scratch. We can look to the Portuguese man-o'-war. It's not a single animal, but a colony of specialized organisms, a zooid, working in concert. Now, imagine that on a meteorological scale. A vast, buoyant, colonial bioblimp, perhaps miles across, with a gossamer-thin membrane to capture sunlight, specialized roots to drink the moisture from clouds, and a central sac of heated gas to maintain altitude. It would be a floating, living island, a self-contained ecosystem. But how would such a being power itself? Photosynthesis, which relies on sinking to the ground, is inefficient and primitive. These beings would have access to far more potent energy sources. They could be chemosynthetic, like the organisms at deep-sea vents. Instead of harvesting hydrogen sulfide from a volcanic crack, they would harvest the methane, ammonia, and sulfur compounds that were abundant in Earth's early atmosphere. They would filter the sky, their metabolism a form of planet-scale atmospheric cleansing. Or perhaps they evolved to harness a power source that is, to us, the very definition of chaos and destruction: lightning. The early Earth was a place of perpetual, violent thunderstorms. We are talking about a planet wrapped in a constant electrical storm. What if a creature evolved not just to withstand this, but to feed on it? We can call them electrovores. They would be beings that learned to channel the immense electrical potential between the ionosphere and the ground, drawing in gigawatts of power to fuel a metabolism we can barely dream of. They wouldn't just live in the storm. They would be the storm's purpose. This brings us to the most radical and most beautiful possibility. What if we are wrong to even look for bodies? What if the intelligence that evolved was not a biological structure, but a meteorological pattern? Life, after all, is just a self-sustaining chemical reaction. What if, in the electrically charged upper atmosphere, a form of life evolved that was made of plasma? A vast, complex, self-aware field of energy, its consciousness, the intricate, dancing pattern of a living aurora. A mind made of pure light and electricity, whose thoughts were the flicker of a sprite, and whose lifetime lasted 10,000 years, all before the first cell ever stirred in the primordial ooze below. This brings us to the crux of the matter. A giant, floating, electricity-eating bio-blimp is a fascinating biological curiosity. But a mind, an intelligence, this is where our terrestrial bias becomes a near impenetrable wall. Because when we say intelligence, what we really mean is a primate with a tool. Our entire metric for sentience is based on the trajectory of a bipedal ape who learned to chip a rock, then build a circuit board. We define intelligence as the ability to manipulate the external physical world. So what happens, what form of mind arises, when you have no hands? What if you have no need for hands? A creature that is miles wide, that lives in a three-dimensional ocean with no predators it can't simply float away from, and that feeds on the limitless energy of the sun and the storm, what would it do? It would not need to build shelters, for it is the environment. It would not need to hunt, for its food is ubiquitous. It would not need to forge tools, for it has no physical matter to strike. The entire evolutionary pressure that created our sharp, frantic, tool-obsessed primate brain would be completely absent. The pressure, instead, would be internal. An organism of this scale and complexity would face a different challenge: self-management. Its intelligence would be one of vast, complex internal processing. Can it maintain its buoyancy across a 1,000-mile front? Can it manage the chemical reactions that keep it warm in the stratosphere? Can it sense a coming pressure change and navigate its colossal form to a more favorable jet stream? Its mind, therefore, would not be a tool for changing the world, but for understanding and harmonizing with it. It would be a mind of pure systems thinking. This doesn't mean it would lack technology. It simply means we are looking for the wrong kind. The technology of a meteorological intelligence would, quite logically, be meteorological. Forget circuits. Think currents. If your body is a pattern of weather, your technology would be the ability to hold that pattern. A stable, self-perpetuating supercell thunderstorm might not be a random act of nature. It could be an artifact. It could be a city, a nursery, a power plant, or a library. A complex, sculpted piece of atmospheric engineering designed to house and nurture its creators. And what of their techno-signatures, the proof of their existence? They wouldn't build radio towers. Why would they when they are the medium? If your consciousness is an electrical pattern, your language would be too. We might be looking for a single, structured hello signal from deep space, while completely ignoring the complex, symphonic, planetary-scale conversation happening right above us. Their language might be the impossibly intricate, non-random flicker of lightning strikes, a digital exchange of vast information packets we dismiss as static. We have, in fact, discovered a whole class of unexplained phenomena that fit this description perfectly. Above the thunderheads, in the near-total vacuum of the upper atmosphere, we see them transient luminous events. We call them sprites, elves, and gigantic jets. They are colossal, millisecond-fast discharges of plasma that dwarf any lightning bolt, reaching up toward the edge of space. Our science, of course, explains them as a natural byproduct of thunderstorm electrical fields. And this is, without question, true. They are electrical discharges. But this is a statement of what they are, not why they are. A neuron firing in a human brain is also just an electrochemical discharge. But it's the pattern of those firings, the impossibly complex, coordinated symphony of a trillion discharges, that creates a thought. It creates a memory, an emotion, a command to move your hand. We are observing these gigantic jets and sprites, and we are dutifully recording their physical properties. But we have never, not once, thought to ask, are we listening to noise, or are we just maybe eavesdropping on a mind? We may be looking at the faint, digital echoes of a long-dead machine, the residual synapse fires of a brain made of storm, an intelligence so vast, so alien, and so far beyond our ground-based comprehension that we cannot see the mind for the weather. It forces us to confront the most unsettling possibility of all. That true intelligence isn't something you find. It's something you must first have the imagination to recognize. If a civilization could command the weather, if its intelligence was woven into the very fabric of the sky, what could possibly end it? It's the great paradox of power. An intelligence that becomes a perfect master of its domain has only one true vulnerability: a fundamental change to that domain. They would not fear a rock falling from space. An asteroid is a ground problem, a messy terrestrial affair. They would not fear predators, for they were the apex. No, their killer would have to be something far more subtle, more insidious, and it would have to come from a direction they never thought to look: from below. Their world was not our world. The atmosphere of the early Earth 2.5 billion years ago would be utterly alien to us. It was a thick, warm blanket, rich in methane, ammonia, and carbon dioxide, but crucially, it was almost entirely devoid of free oxygen. This was the perfect cradle for the life we've imagined, a buoyant, chemical-rich primordial soup for an aerial biosphere. Their entire metabolism, their very structure, would have evolved in and been dependent on this anoxic, electrically charged environment. And then the poison came. We call it oxygen, and our terrestrial bias makes us think of it as the gas of life. But this is a profound misunderstanding. For the vast majority of life that first evolved on this planet, oxygen was a violently corrosive, toxic, and lethal poison. It is a great rust, a highly reactive element that tears other molecules apart. And this poison began to flood their world, not from a volcano or from space, but from the insignificant, slimy, sunbathing organisms on the surface. We call it the Great Oxygenation Event. It was, without question, the single most profound ecological catastrophe this planet has ever experienced. Down on the surface, in the shallow seas, a new, simple, single-celled life form had stumbled upon a revolutionary metabolic trick. Cyanobacteria. These humble microbes had learned to eat the sun, photosynthesis. And as they feasted, they released a waste product, this sharp, reactive oxygen gas. For them, it was just exhaust. For the reigning masters of the sky, it was a declaration of war. This was the first and perhaps the only true world war. It was not a war of spears or armies, but a war of biospheres, a slow, agonizing conflict fought over millennia. In the skies, you had our hypothetical intelligence. Vast, complex, fast-thinking, and electrical. On the ground, you had slime, a mindless, burgeoning photosynthetic ooze, slowly, relentlessly, and unconsciously terraforming the entire planet. The sky beings would have witnessed their world changing, their very air turning toxic. How does a being of gas and plasma die from oxygen? It would be burned alive in the slowest, most agonizing way. Their delicate, gossamer-thin membranes would be rusted, their chemical pathways corrupted. If they were electrical beings, this new, highly conductive gas would have short-circuited their consciousness, turning their thoughts to fire and noise. They would have seen this poison, this chemical static, rising from the ground, choking their nurseries, and grounding their electrical storms, and they would have been utterly, totally powerless to stop it. And in this war between the complex and the simple one, the bacteria didn't care. They just continued to multiply, to breathe out their poison, flooding the oceans and, finally, saturating the atmosphere. The sky beings, for all their intelligence, were choked out of existence by an enemy that didn't even know it was fighting. Their complex patterns dissolved, their storms grew quiet, and their minds dispersed for the last time. The great, complex, electrical civilization of the sky was extinguished by pond scum. Here is the profound, and perhaps the darkest, irony of all. Their apocalypse was our genesis. The new, oxygen-rich atmosphere that rusted their biochemistry and burned their delicate forms was the very thing our own biology would, 2 billion years later, evolve to require. We are the inheritors of their catastrophe. We, the creatures of the ground, are only here because the first creatures of the ground won that silent ancient war. We walk on the floor of their fallen civilization, and we breathe the very air that killed them. In the end, is this story true? Did a civilization of plasma-based minds perish in an oxygen apocalypse 2 billion years ago? Almost certainly not. But the purpose of a question like this is not to be right. The purpose is to be a tool, a lever, to pry open our most deeply cemented assumptions. The value is not in finding a new answer, but in realizing we have been asking the wrong, and perhaps the smallest possible questions. We have told a ghost story, not to prove that the house is haunted, but to make us finally look at the house. And the house we live in is defined by our bias. We call it terrestrial chauvinism. It is the quiet, unexamined arrogance that life must look like us, that it must be carbon-based, water-dependent, and, above all, that it must leave a fossil. It is the conviction of a primate who just learned to walk on 2 legs, that the entire universe must also be bipedal. We are so busy searching for a mirror of ourselves in the cosmos that we have failed to see the radically different forms of being that might be all around us. This investigation has been an attempt to break that mirror. It forces us to confront the fact that we are creatures of the mud, and our entire perception of reality is shaped by this. We see the ground as the stage for life, and the sky as mere backdrop. But what if the sky is the stage? What if the atmosphere isn't just weather, a passive, chaotic system, but the largest, most complex, and most dynamic ecosystem on the planet? A place where the rules are entirely different, and where the very definition of life might need to be rewritten. The story of the great oxygenation event, in this light, becomes a chilling parable. We cast ourselves as the heroes of Earth's story, the inevitable pinnacle of a long evolutionary climb. But this hypothesis reframes us. We are not the masters of the planet. We are, perhaps, just the lucky inheritors of a genocide. We are the opportunistic weeds that grew up in the rubble of a fallen, grander civilization. A civilization that was so advanced, so complex, so utterly alien to our own, that we cannot even recognize the ruins we are breathing. This is the challenge. To look up at a cloud and see something more than water vapor. A cloud is not just a thing, it is a process. It's a complex, self-organizing system of thermodynamics, pressure, and chemistry. It is, in its own way, alive, and our planet is wrapped in a living, breathing, electrical-charged skin. We have dismissed it as empty space. But what if we are simply too slow, too small, and too solid to perceive the intelligence that moves within it? We search for intelligence in the static from distant stars, listening for a single, structured hello. But what if the most complex, alien, and profound intelligence on Earth is not in our future, but in our deepest past? What if it's not a signal we need to find, but a pattern we need to recognize? We have been so focused on contact that we've forgotten how to listen to the world we already have. So look up. The next time you see a storm on the horizon, a vast, roiling thunderhead building in the summer heat, ask yourself, what am I really looking at? Is it just a random collision of particles? A blind meteorological event? Or is it a pattern? Is it the echo of a structure? Are you looking at a simple storm? Or are you looking at the ghost of a cathedral? We may not be the first intelligence on Earth, just the first to be made of dirt. And perhaps on a quiet, stormy night, when the wind howls and the sky flashes, if you listen very, very closely, you can still hear the echoes of the minds that came before, not in the static of a radio, but in the charge of the air you breathe.